5 children, 1 broken man, a land slowly dying under a brutal summer sun. Caleb Rohr had lost everything that held his world together. Until a widow who trusted no one stepped into his life. She didn't come looking for love. He didn't ask gently. But what began as survival would soon face judgment, danger, and a truth that could tear them all apart. This is not just a story about the Wild West. It's about the moment when everything is on the line.
Caleb Carter pushed his wife's locket into the fresh dirt of her grave and made a promise he had no idea how to keep. He had 5 kids, burnt crops, and a son bent on killing everything. Then she appeared at his fence, Eleanor Hayes, the widow who'd shut the door on hope and second chances. He didn't ask her pretty. He just laid his broken heart right out on the ground. And her answer changed everything for both of them. If this story pulls at your heartstrings, subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where y'all are listening from. The morning Caleb buried his wife, that sun came up anyway. That's what stuck with him, how the sky just didn't seem to care. It spilled gold across the dry grass, like it didn't know Margaret was gone, like 5 children hadn't lost their mother. He stood there long after the preacher said his words and his neighbor Jim Pratt gave his shoulder a firm squeeze. Long after everyone else had left, it was just Caleb and 5 little shadows in the heat. He heard the youngest, Clara, first. She was barely 3 and didn't rightly know what that wooden cross meant. But she knew her daddy's back was shaking. "Papa," she whispered. "Daddy, your back is doing that shaky thing." He turned. Her big brown eyes, so much like Margaret's, made him look away. "I'm okay, darling," he said, his voice somehow steady. His oldest, Thomas, was 14, trying his best to be the man of the house. Ruth, at 11, was trying to hold all her little siblings' hands at once. 7-year-old George had cried so hard he'd gotten hiccups that just wouldn't quit. And 5-year-old Abigail kept asking if her mama was cold. "She ain't cold," Ruth told her. "She's with the angels." "How do you know?" "I just know." Caleb pulled them all into a big, clumsy hug that felt like it could never be enough. George's hiccups muffled against his shirt. He rested his chin on Thomas's head and felt the boy go stiff, trying not to cry. "Thomas," Caleb said softly, "it's all right to let it out, son." "I'm fine, Pa." "I know you are. But you don't have to be, not right now." A moment passed. Then Thomas's shoulders gave way, and he cried, like the boy he still was. Caleb held him and the others tight, standing by that fresh grave with no earthly idea what he was going to do next. What came next was pure chaos, the kind a man can't ever prepare for. Margaret had been the heart of the home, the one who cooked, mended, and settled every squabble. She handled 5 kids like a river handles water, always moving, knowing every turn. Caleb had worked the land. Together they made sense. Without her, the whole thing fell apart in just a few days. By the end of that first week, George had broken 2 windows and Abigail had taken shears to her own hair. Clara wasn't sleeping through the night. Thomas vanished for an afternoon. And Ruth, trying to cook supper, set a dish towel on fire. The laundry piled up, a monument to all the things he didn't know how to fix. He fell into bed each night with aching bones and woke before dawn with his heart pounding, remembering it all over again. The land itself wasn't offering any help. A Nevada summer was a mean thing. The creek was nearly dry. The east pasture needed fencing before the cattle strayed. Hay needed cutting, and 2 horses needed new shoes. He only had 2 hands, and they weren't near enough. He was standing at the fence line one morning, the sun already beaten down hard, when he heard a wagon. He knew Eleanor Hayes's gray mare before he saw Eleanor herself. The widow who lived a few miles east, on the place she got when her husband died of a fever 4 winters back. Caleb didn't know her well. Nobody really did. She kept to herself, traded at the store, and spoke only when spoken to. More than one man had come calling after her husband passed, and not a one ever made it past her front porch. She pulled her wagon up to his gate without an invitation. That was the first surprise. The basket on the seat beside her was the second. Mr. Carter, she said. Her voice was steady, not warm but not cold either, just plain fact. I brought supper. Figured you might be struggling. Caleb looked from the basket to her face. He had so much pride and hurt bottled up inside him. One kind word was liable to make him fall apart. That's mighty decent of you, Mrs. Hayes, he managed to say. It's pot roast, and a jar of preserves for the children. She set the basket on the gatepost, staying in her wagon. It was like she'd decided to help, but also decided not to get mixed up in it. Heard the little one cut her hair. Word gets around fast. This is Harlan Creek, Mr. Carter. Word don't travel. It just appears. She picked up the reins. I'm sorry for your loss. Margaret was a good woman. She was the best I ever knew, he said, his voice rough. Eleanor Hayes paused. He saw something in her eyes then. It wasn't pity, thank the Lord. It was something that knew. Yes, she said quietly. I know what that's like. She clicked to her horse and was gone. He told himself not to think on it, but he did, not in a romantic way. He was still turning to tell Margaret something at the dinner table. But he thought of her like a man lost in the desert thinks about a distant well. She came again on Friday, same time, same straightforward way. Chicken and dumplings this time. You don't have to keep doing this, Caleb told her. I know that. Then why are you? Because your children are hungry, and you're working yourself to the bone. She said it like she was talking about the weather. I have plenty of food. It costs me nothing. He wanted to argue. He wasn't a man who took charity. But then Clara, holding his hand, looked up at Mrs. Hayes with those big brown eyes of hers. Before Caleb could speak, Clara said, You smell like flowers. Eleanor blinked. It was the first time Caleb saw that steady composure of hers crack just for a second. Lavender, Eleanor said after a moment. From the soap. My mama used lavender soap, Clara said. The quiet that hung in the air after that felt like it stretched on forever. Eleanor went rigid when Clara asked if she'd be their new mama. She said no, ma'am, and left awful quick. That night, Caleb's heart ached hearing his 11-year-old daughter quiet the baby. Before sunup, his oldest boy, Thomas, told him plain, Pa, you can't go on like this. Caleb insisted he was fine, but Thomas brought up the burned meals. It wasn't the boy's load to carry, Caleb said. You're my father, Thomas replied. He suggested Mrs. Hayes for the little one's sake. You look like a man walking straight into a wall, he said, leaving Caleb with nothing to say. For 3 days, Caleb wrestled with the idea. After his boy George took a bad fall, the household chaos made his choice for him. He rode to Eleanor's, feeling every bit as tired as he looked. He found her on the porch shelling peas, her face giving nothing away as he approached with his hat in his hands. He told her straight he couldn't handle the farm and 5 kids by himself. He started by offering her a housekeeper's job, but her flat reply made him stop. He knew he had to tell the whole truth. No, ma'am, he said quietly. I reckon my children need a mother. He admitted all he had was a house full of need and a man still grieving. He asked if maybe she deserved more than being alone. She stared hard, then told him to leave, and to come back the next day. As he left, she hollered she'd bring that lavender soap for Clara when I come. Mr. Carter, that is not the same thing. She turned and went inside. Caleb rode on home to 5 waiting children, feeling something new rise in his chest. It was not hope just yet, but it was close. Eleanor Hayes appeared the next morning before breakfast, riding a horse with just one saddlebag. Her face dared anyone to challenge her. Caleb came out on the porch holding Clara and a pan of uncooked eggs. He just stopped and stared. You said tomorrow, he said. It is tomorrow, she replied, swinging down from her horse. Do you need me to leave and come back in a few hours? No, ma'am. Good. She tied her horse and looked at Clara. The little girl looked back, then patted Eleanor's cheek like she was taming a wild animal. Eleanor stood perfectly still. She does that, Caleb said. I see that. Her voice was steady, but her eyes had softened. She took the pan from his hand. Go on and feed your horses. I will finish breakfast. Mrs. Hayes, we have not agreed on any terms. Terms? She said as if the word was ridiculous. You asked for my help. I am here. I am. Now go feed your horses. He went. When he came back, breakfast was on the table. The 5 children were all sitting and eating in a silence Caleb had not seen in 3 weeks. Ruth watched Eleanor with a look of cautious hope. Thomas sat at the other end of the table, watching her like a man trying to read a poker hand. Caleb sat. George said through a mouthful of food, These biscuits are better than Pa's. George, Ruth snapped, it is the truth. Everything is better than my biscuits, Caleb said. That is not saying much, son. At the stove, Eleanor almost let out a laugh. Caleb saw it. Thomas waited until she stepped outside to check on her horse before he turned to his father. What did you say to her exactly? I asked for her help. What kind of help? Caleb looked his son in the eye. The kind we need. And what does she get from it? Thomas said. I am not being disrespectful, Pa, but a woman like that does not do a thing like this for nothing. She got up before sunrise, which means she was thinking about it all night. What did you say to make her think so hard? Caleb looked at his son, who was old enough to ask the right questions, but young enough to be hurt by the answers. I told her the truth, Caleb said. That is all. Thomas thought about that, then he picked up his biscuit and said no more, which was the most approval he ever gave. Eleanor set the terms, and she had clearly thought them through. She would come every morning and leave every evening. She would run the house, cook the meals, and teach the children. In exchange, Thomas would go to her place twice a week to help with heavy labor, and she would take 2 days a month for herself, with no questions asked. Those 2 days are not negotiable, she stated. Understood. And I will not be the talk of the town, she added, looking right at him. I know what people will say, but if anyone asks, we have a practical arrangement. That is all it is, Caleb agreed. They shook hands on the porch like it was a business deal, because it was. What neither of them had thought about was the children. Children do not care about arrangements. They care about who is warm and who will listen. And Eleanor Hayes was both of those things. Once she started braiding hair and finding lost boots, it was Clara who warmed to her first. Clara always did. That child could not hold back her affection. By the end of the week, she followed Eleanor everywhere like a little duckling. Eleanor accepted it like someone holding a fragile thing they are afraid to drop. Abigail was next, won over when Eleanor sat with her in the grass and asked the names of all the wildflowers. George respected anyone who could beat him, and Eleanor beat him at checkers twice without even trying. That earned his admiration. Ruth was the slowest to trust. She had been holding the family together for weeks. She was not ready to give up that job so easily. To trust Eleanor meant admitting she needed help, admitting she'd been scared. But Eleanor never tried to take over. She just worked beside Ruth, always asking her opinion. She saw her as the capable young woman she was. Ruth had been forced to be a little adult for too long, and she was desperate for someone else to take the reins. For the first time in a long while, she could finally breathe. Thomas. He was the last to come around. He was polite and did what he was told, but not a lick more. He just watched Eleanor with those steady, careful eyes of his, and he waited. Caleb figured Eleanor knew exactly what the boy was waiting for. She never pushed him or tried to win him over. She just showed up and did the work, letting him make up his own mind. That kind of patience was something Caleb deeply admired. Then one morning, everything changed. Thomas walked into the kitchen with a broken harness he'd been fighting with for 2 days. He set it on the table and said flat out, I can't get the stitching right. Eleanor looked at it. Your mama teach you any? Hold it like this. The angle's the thing, not the pressure. Most folks push too hard. She handed it back. Try it. He tried, and it was better. Again, she told him. He did it again, and it was better still. He never said thank you, not with words. But when he left with that harness, the way he held his shoulders was different. That night at supper, he gave Eleanor a 3-sentence answer about the south fence instead of his usual one. For Thomas, that was as good as opening the front door. After 3 weeks, the The folks in Harlan Creek got to talking. Caleb and Eleanor both knew it was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. Walking into Murdoch's store and feeling that sudden quiet was a heavy thing. Vera Hutchkins was the worst of the bunch, always was. She was the kind who'd wrap her meanness up in a cloak of concern. She cornered Eleanor in the store on a Tuesday, meaning she'd planned it. "I'm sure you mean well," Vera said, loud enough for the whole store to hear. "But people are wondering what you're doing out there. They're wondering what a man like that has promised a woman like you. It just does not look right, and I would hate for your good name to suffer." Eleanor Hayes stood up to her full height. She looked at Vera with a calm so complete it made folks near the back take a step away. "Vera," she said, "I do appreciate your concern for my name. I will worry on it right after I am sure 5 children have food in their bellies." She turned back to the counter. "The flour, please, Mr. Murdoch." Murdoch fetched the flour. Vera Hutchkins didn't say another word. But walking Eleanor to her wagon, Caleb saw the tightness in her jaw. That cost her more than she let on. "You did not have to do that," he said. "Yes," she replied, "I did." She put the sack in the wagon. Women like Vera only stop when they hit something that will not move. You learn that lesson one way or another. She climbed onto the seat. "I learned it the hard way." He looked up at her, feeling sorry for putting her in that spot. "You did not put me anywhere I did not choose to go, Mr. Carter." She picked up the reins. "That is what you need to understand." He stood in the street and watched her drive off. He thought about a woman who saw the cost and came anyway. He did not know what to do with a thing like that. That night, he sat on the porch and thought about Margaret. He did it most nights, talking to her in his head. He was a man who knew his wife was gone, but still felt the shape of her beside him. He told her about Eleanor, about her biscuits, and the way little Clara followed her everywhere. He told her about Vera Hutchkins in the store. He told her what Eleanor said, that she had chosen to be there. He sat in the quiet for a long time. Then the screen door creaked open, and Ruth came out in her nightgown. "Can't sleep?" he asked her. "I keep thinking," she said, sitting on the step beside him. She was 11 years old, but sometimes she seemed 40. "Pa, can I ask you something?" "Always." She was quiet for a bit. "Is Mrs. Hayes going to stay? She is here every day. That is not what I mean." Ruth looked at him with her mother's eyes, direct and clear. "I mean, is she going to stay for good?" Caleb chose his words with care. "I do not know, sweetheart. But you want her to?" He paused. Ruth waited, patient as ever. "I want what is best for this family," he finally said. "That is not an answer." "No," he said, "it is not." He put an arm around her. "What do you want?" Ruth was quiet for a long time. "I want to stop being scared," she finally whispered. "Every morning I wake up afraid today's the day it all falls apart. That you will get sick or hurt, and we will have nobody." Her voice was small. "When Mrs. Hayes is here, I stop being scared. I do not know if that is right, but it is true." Caleb pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "It is true," he said, "and it is not wrong." They sat in the quiet for a spell. Then Ruth said, almost to herself, "She looks at you sometimes, when you are not looking." He went still. "What do you mean?" "When you are working with the horses or talking to Thomas. She looks at you." Ruth thought for a moment. "Like she is surprised. Like she never expected you to be the way you are." Caleb did not know what to say to that. "I just thought you should know," Ruth said. She stood up and kissed his cheek, a rare gift these days, and went back inside. He sat on that porch a long time after. 4 days later, Eleanor arrived with a split lip. She gave him a flimsy story about a door frame in the dark. Caleb knew what a door frame did to a person's face. This was not it. He did not push, just brought her coffee and went back to his work. He knew a woman like her would run from questions that came on too strong. But later, when they were alone in the kitchen, he put down the harness he was fixing. "You do not have to tell me a thing," he said, not looking at her. But if someone is hurting you, I would like to know. She kept kneading her bread dough. The silence stretched out. It was not anybody, she finally said. It was just a disagreement. With who? Her jaw went tight. That is my business, Mr. Carter. Yes, ma'am, it is. He picked up the harness again. Douglas had a brother, she said suddenly. Frank Hayes. He has ideas about the property, about what I should be doing with it. He came by last night. Caleb set the harness down slow. Did he put his hands on you? The silence was all the answer he needed. Something cold and quiet settled deep in the heart of Caleb Carter. His anger was always the quiet kind that did not raise its voice. Eleanor. He had never used her first name before. If that man comes near you again, I want to know about it. She looked at him then, truly looked, deciding how much she could trust him. You have got enough to handle, she said, her voice careful. I do, he agreed. And you are part of what I am handling now. He held her gaze. That is not a burden. I want to be clear. It is not a burden. Eleanor looked at him, and he saw some of her guardedness finally settle. All right, she said very quietly. He nodded and went back to his work. But that evening, after Eleanor rode home, Caleb saddled his own horse. He rode 3 miles north to where Frank Hayes lived with his drinking and his bad ideas about what a widow owed him. Caleb went to see Frank Hayes, ready to speak plainly. Frank met him at the door with a drink, already looking for a fight. Caleb said they had to talk about Eleanor. Frank called her land Hayes family business. That property is hers, clear and legal, Caleb said. I've seen the deed myself. What you are doing is not family business, it is harassment. Touch her again, and it will be something else entirely. Frank tried to use his size to crowd him, but Caleb stood his ground. You ain't her kin, Frank growled. Just a broke farmer with too many mouths to feed. Caleb cut right through it. I am telling you plain. Leave her be. If you do not, the sheriff will be out here and I will be right with him. Frank swirled his whiskey, trying to figure if Caleb was bluffing. Caleb just stared back, steady as a rock. Get off my land, Frank finally said. Gladly, Caleb replied. Remember what I said. He rode home in the dark, his hands finally starting to shake. He was not a violent man, but some things a man just had to do. Eleanor Hayes with a busted lip was one of them. He only regretted not telling her first. He told her the next morning, plain and simple. She set the coffee pot down real slow. You went to see Frank Hayes. It was not a question. The kitchen was heavy with silence. Her face was calm, but he saw a hot anger in her eyes. I am not one of your children, Mr. Carter, she said, her words sharp. I do not need you fighting my battles for me. I know that, he said. Then why? Because you should not have to, he answered. He put his hands on you, Eleanor. I could not know that and do nothing. It is just how I am made. The anger in her eyes softened into worry. Did he threaten you? She asked. He tried. Caleb. She used his first name and did not take it back. Frank Hayes is not a man who forgives. Then I have made an enemy of him, Caleb said flatly. I have had worse. You have 5 children. I know how many I have. She pressed her lips together. He knew she chose her words with care, knowing what a careless one could cost. You should have told me first, she finally said. You are right. I should have. His words seemed to take the fight out of her. Do not do it again. Next time I will tell you. There will not be a next time. I will handle it, she said. Now sit and eat. He did, but he saw her hand tremble. He knew her anger was mostly fear she had lived with for a long time. The real trouble arrived 3 days later. It was not from Frank. It was a letter his son Thomas brought him. Thomas put the letter on the table with a look that said he already knew it was bad news. It was from a law firm. Caleb read it twice. In fancy lawyer words, it said there was a lien on his property from the bank, a debt for $432 that he knew nothing about, a debt taken out 18 months ago by his late wife, Margaret. He read her name 3 times. The debt was against the east pasture. If not paid in 60 days, the bank would foreclose. He did not have that kind of money, not even close. "It is all right," Caleb told Thomas. "It does not look all right." Caleb folded the letter. "It is something I need to look into. Do not mention it to the others." "You are not going to tell me?" "Not yet." Thomas gave him a long, knowing look and went back outside. That $432 debt sat on his chest like a stone. He rode to town the next morning and waited on the bank steps for Mr. Dryan, a man who disliked having his routine disturbed. "The Roar account," Caleb said. "I need to see the full record." Dryan started with pleasantries. "The record, please," Caleb said again. The truth was worse than the letter. Margaret had been borrowing for 2 years, $50 here, $70 there, all in her own handwriting. "Did she say what it was for?" Caleb asked. Dryan paused. "Medical costs, I believe, for one of the children." Caleb went cold. "Which child?" "The youngest, Clara." Clara, born so small, who spent her first winter being carried 20 miles each way to the doctor. Clara's first year had cost them more than he ever knew about. Margaret had handled it the way she handled anything that might worry him. By herself. She shielded him from the things she thought he could not carry. He sat in that office without a word. "Did she come in alone?" he finally asked. "Yes, always." Caleb nodded, thanked the man, and left. The ride home was not just filled with grief. It was filled with a new understanding of his wife's love. She had taken on $432 of debt so he would not lose sleep. She had saved their daughter's life and never spoke of the price. He turned into his lane and saw Eleanor's horse at the post. It all hit him at once. Grief for Margaret, gratitude for Eleanor, and the awful feeling of the ground giving way. He knew he had to tell her. Keeping it from her felt like a lie, and he could not lie to Eleanor Hayes. That evening, with the kids in bed, he stopped Eleanor at the kitchen door. He said, "Can you sit down a minute?" His tone made her sit right down. He told her about the letter, the bank, and the $432. He laid it all out in a flat voice, the one he used when he couldn't trust any other. Eleanor listened, never saying a word. When he was done, she was quiet for a bit. "The east pasture," she said. "If they take that, what happens to your grazing?" Always practical, that was Eleanor. "Cuts my herd by a third, maybe more," he said. "And the 60 days, when's that start?" The letter was dated the 14th, so we've got till mid-September. Eleanor put her hands flat on the table, thinking hard. "I have money," she said. "Saved up since Douglas died. I can cover it." His refusal was instant and solid. "Absolutely not." "Caleb, no." He leaned forward. "Eleanor, I asked you here to help my family, not to bankroll it. I will not take your savings." "What other way is there? Sell cattle?" she asked. "You know you don't have any to spare. And Dryan doesn't make deals. He makes transactions. You can't work something out with him." She held his gaze steady and direct. "It's a loan between us, written down with terms we agree on. This isn't charity, it's just the most practical solution we have." "It's not practical," he said. "It changes things." "What things?" He just looked at her, and the thing he couldn't say sat right there between them on the table. "Everything," he said, real quiet. Just then a high voice called from upstairs. "Papa!" It was Clara's nightmare voice, sharp and sudden. Caleb was up and moving before she finished, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Clara was sitting up in bed, all sweaty and confused, reaching for nothing. "Mama," she kept saying. "I'm here, baby," he said, gathering her up. "I'm right here." "I want Mama," she cried, the broken sound of a child asking for what she knows she can't have. "I know," he said softly. "I know you do." He held her and rocked her in the dark until her crying slowed and she fell back asleep. When he came back downstairs, Eleanor was still at the table. She hadn't left. She was holding a coffee cup, just looking at it. "Is she all right?" Eleanor asked. "She is now." Eleanor nodded. "I used to do that after Douglas died. Wake up reaching for him." He sat back down across from her. "How long did it take to stop?" She thought for a second. "About a year, before my hands learned what my head already knew." She paused. "But there's a difference between knowing someone's gone and being ready to stop grieving them." "Is there?" he asked. "Yes," she said, meeting his eyes. "You can honor a memory and still keep living. They aren't opposites." After a moment, she added, "Margaret sounds like she would have understood that." He looked at her. It was the way she said it, just a simple truth. "She would have liked you," he said. "Margaret would have liked you a whole lot, I think." Eleanor didn't say anything, just turned the cup in her hands. When she looked back at him, something in her face had settled. "Take the loan," she said. "Think of Clara." He closed his eyes for a second. "I'll think about it." "That means yes," Eleanor said, and for the first time in weeks she gave a real small smile. He almost said something right then, something big and clumsy that they weren't ready for. But he swallowed it down. The next morning, though, Eleanor found a paper on the porch table. It was a handwritten loan agreement with a repayment schedule, all in his clean, careful writing. There was a line for her name, and down in the margin he'd written, "Thank you for all of it, not just the money." Eleanor stood there holding the paper. Then she pulled a pen from her pocket, an old teacher's habit, and signed her name. She walked inside, put the coffee on, and started breakfast, just as if she belonged there. From the barn, Caleb heard the sounds of his household waking up, a quiet rhythm that felt right. He felt his own heart start beating again. He just kept his hands busy, letting the feelings soak in like a good rain. He was careful, thankful, and scared all at once. Something else was coming for him, too, something he'd have to put a name on soon. All the while, the summer heat beat down. North of town, Frank Hayes read Eleanor's letter. It was penned like a contract, with an iron will behind it. His hands clenched the paper. He sure hadn't seen that coming, but he should have. Frank didn't answer with a letter. He answered with lawyers. Two of them showed up in Harlan Creek on a Tuesday riding in a rented buggy. They looked like city men who enjoyed sending a bill. By noon, the whole town knew they'd gone straight to the county records office. And by supper, Caleb knew why. Thomas brought the news, showing up at the barn. "Frank Hayes is fighting the deed," he said flat out. Caleb put down his tools. "On what grounds?" "That the property was Hayes' land before Douglas ever bought it, and that Eleanor's claim was only on the improvements, not the land itself." Thomas leaned on the door. "Manny Driscoll's boy at the records office heard it all." "That ain't how a deed works." "I know, but lawyers get paid whether they're right or not, and Frank Hayes has got the money." Thomas waited a beat. "He's also been talking. Telling folks Eleanor's behavior since Douglas passed ain't been appropriate." Another pause. "He's getting real specific." That cold quiet settled in Caleb's chest again. "He's using us against her." "He's using you against her," Thomas corrected. "Your name is what makes the dirt stick." Caleb stood dead still for a spell. Outside, he could hear the kids fussing over nothing important. He heard Clara humming on the porch and Eleanor moving through the house, quiet and steady as always. "Does she know?" Caleb asked. "Don't think so," Thomas said. Caleb nodded. He put his tools away proper because he wasn't a man for leaving a mess, even in a storm. Then he walked to the house. Eleanor was at the kitchen table, helping Abigail with her reading, her finger tracing each word. She looked up and saw it all in his face. She'd been able to read him like that from the get-go. She sent Abigail to the porch to practice. The screen door shut. Eleanor folded her hands on the table and just waited. He told her everything, plain and simple, just how she liked it. When he was done, Eleanor was silent for exactly 4 seconds. He'd learned to count them. 4 seconds was her thinking, not her getting mad. That was Eleanor at her toughest. "He's smarter than I figured," she finally said. "He hired smart men. It won't stick. The deed is solid." But her voice was tight. "It don't have to stick in court. It just has to stick in people's minds long enough." She trailed off. "Long enough to make you look like his lies," Caleb finished. She looked right at him. "And you?" "I don't much care what Frank Hayes calls me." "You should," she said. It wasn't cold, it was worried, which was worse coming from her than anger. "You have children in this town. They go to school here. If Frank turns folks against you—" She stopped, her lips pressed tight. "This is what I was afraid of. That my being here would cost you something I couldn't fix." "Eleanor," he sat down, "you haven't cost me a thing." "Caleb, look at me." He did. "Before you, Ruth was trying to be her own mama. Clara never slept. George broke every window I had. And Thomas looked at me each morning like I might just fall apart." He kept his voice steady, his eyes on hers. "I was sinking, and doing it quietly. That's the worst way, 'cause no one throws you a rope if they can't see you're drowning." He paused. "You threw me a rope. I don't care what Frank Hayes or anyone in this town calls it. That's what you did. And I won't let you call it a mistake." Her hands were tight on the table. Her jaw was set, holding something back. "I sent him that letter," she said. "I poked the bear." "He put his hands on you," Caleb said. "Don't you dare turn this around on yourself." She closed her eyes for a second. "I'm not scared of Frank Hayes." "I know. I'm scared of what he can do to your children. If this gets ugly, they're the ones who'll pay. Abigail's already been asked things at school. Thomas heard something nasty at the feed store." She let out a breath. "I won't be the reason your family gets hurt in their own home." The words landed hard. Caleb just looked at her. "Is that what you're thinking?" he said. "That the answer is for you to leave?" She didn't have to say a word. "Eleanor," he leaned in, "if you walk away from this place on account of Frank Hayes, you ain't protecting my kids. You're giving that man exactly what he wants." He watched her. "And you'll be taking something from them they never had before you. All because some bully with a lawyer told you to." His jaw was tight. "Is that the woman you are?" The quiet stretched out. Then Eleanor sat up taller. Something settled in her, the same strength she'd used on Vera Hutchkins at the store. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Good. But we need a plan," she said right away. Wishing wasn't working, and letters just brought lawyers. She put her hands flat on the table. "So, what's our move?" Their move was to see Judge Harland. Not the next day, but that very night. While Thomas watched the kids, Caleb and Eleanor rode to town, side by side, for all to see. They went to the home of Judge Amos Harland, a man who'd been in that county for 30 years. He knew its land and the families who tried to cheat it. The judge was... The old judge watched them come up the walk, a pipe in his hand. He had the look of a man who'd seen it all. "Caleb Carter," he said. "Eleanor Hayes. I figured you'd be along." "You heard about the lawyers then," Caleb said. "Son, I hear everything in this county. Have a seat." They sat. Eleanor laid out the whole mess, clear and simple, like the schoolteacher she once was. The judge just listened, puffing on his pipe. When she was done, he tapped it on the rail. "The deed's solid," he said. "Douglas Hayes bought that land fair and square back in 1871, and he left it to Eleanor. Frank Hayes has no claim." He paused. "But—" And Caleb could feel that "but" coming. Frank's making a fuss over in Carson City. The men he hired, they're not fools. They'll drag this out and make it cost you. A slow, costly fight is its own kind of victory. He looked at Eleanor. You got the money for that. I've set aside my savings for something else, she said, not looking at Caleb. The judge quirked an eyebrow. Well, then, you'd better decide if you're ready for a long fight. Or, he said, you need to find a quicker way to make Frank's whole argument pointless. What kind of way is that? Caleb asked. Judge Harlan gave him a look that said nothing and everything all at once. The kind of way that changes your legal tie to the property. He tapped his pipe. I'm not suggesting a thing, I just know the law. He stood. You all think on it. They rode in silence for a good while. Finally, Eleanor spoke to the road ahead. He wants us to get married. I know what he wants. More quiet. That's not much of a plan, she said. No, Caleb agreed. The silence that followed was heavy with things they couldn't say. I'll call my lawyer in the morning, Eleanor said at last. She's a sharp woman in Carson City, sharper than anyone Frank could hire. All right. And you ought to tell Thomas what's going on. He's old enough. He'll take it better from you. I know. She glanced at him in the darkness. You're awful quiet. I'm thinking on what the judge said. The horses clopped along on the warm summer night. Among other things, he finally added. She turned her eyes back to the road. When they got to the house, Thomas was in the doorway, his relief barely hidden. Eleanor went inside to see the children. Caleb tended to the horses. By the time he came back, she had her coat on. He walked her out to her horse. It was a habit he'd fallen into, walking her out and waiting till she was down the lane. She untied the reins, then turned. Caleb. She said his name different now. It used to be careful, but now it felt natural. Whatever happens with Frank, I don't regret coming here. He watched her in the moonlight. Even with all this mess. I spent 4 years being so careful, she said. I built a safe, small life. And I was... She hesitated. I wasn't happy. I was just fine. There's a big difference. I'd forgotten that. Until when? He asked, his voice low. She just looked at him for a long moment. You get some rest, Caleb, she said, her voice soft. Then she rode off. He watched until she disappeared into the night. Inside, Thomas was still up. I need to tell you some things, Caleb said. Thomas looked at him. I already know most of it, figured. Caleb sat down. What don't you know? Thomas was quiet a second. What are you going to do about Mrs. Hayes? I'm going to make sure Frank can't touch her. That's not what I mean. The boy's voice was cautious. I mean about her. He met his father's gaze. You look at her like you used to look at Mama. Not the same, but the same kind of look. And she looks at you like she's hoping you'll notice. Caleb just sat there with that. I'm not mad about it, Thomas said, rushing the words out. I want you to know. At first I watched her, waiting for a mistake, a reason not to trust her. But she never gave me one. She just kept showing up, doing the work. She was just good to us. And I kept watching. And she just kept being good. He looked up. So, I'm not upset. I just wanted to tell you. Caleb felt a lump in his throat. She's not your mother, he said. I know. Thomas's voice was firm. But she's someone, a real someone, and we need that. He stood up and did something he hadn't done in years. He put a hand on his father's shoulder just for a second. Night, Pa. He went upstairs, his footsteps sounding older than they were. Caleb sat there, feeling the weight of it all. The trouble hit 3 days later at noon. It wasn't from Frank or his lawyers. It was George. He'd been too quiet all week. He'd gotten into it with 2 older town boys at the creek. They'd said ugly things about Eleanor, things a 12-year-old shouldn't say to a 7-year-old. George came home with a bloody nose, his little fist still tight. Eleanor saw him first. She came out of the kitchen, took one look, and knelt right down in front of him. What happened? She asked. It wasn't a question. It was a door. George's chin started to tremble. They said things, he managed. About you and Pa. His voice broke. They said you weren't a decent woman. Eleanor's face was like stone. Her hands were steady on his shoulders. What did you do? I hit Danny Morse, George said, ashamed. Did he fall? A small pause. Yes, ma'am. A flicker of something crossed Eleanor's face. Come here. She pulled him close, and the tough little boy he was trying to be just fell apart against her. She held him tight. She didn't say it was all right, because it wasn't. She didn't tell him he shouldn't have hit the boy, because she wasn't sorry he did. She just held him. Caleb stood in the doorway watching, and felt something shift inside him for good. Something that, once it happens, you can't take back. George finally pulled away, wiping his face on his sleeve. Mrs. Hayes, he said. Yes. Are you going to leave? Leave? The question was sharp, the way a kid asks. Because of what folks are saying. Eleanor looked at him. No, she said. I am not. Promise? She paused for just a second. I promise you. George nodded, wiped his nose, and stood up straight. Okay, he said, and went upstairs. They could hear his loud whisper telling Ruth everything. Eleanor stood up and turned, seeing Caleb there. He didn't try to hide what was on his face. She just looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, real quiet, I meant it. I know, he said. She held his eyes. Whatever had been building between them was closer now. He could feel it, like the air changing right before a storm. He took a step her way. She stood her ground. Eleanor, he started. Don't, she said. Not mean, but careful. Not yet. Not like this. Her eyes were steady. When you say what I think you're going to say, I want it to be 'cause the time is right, not because we're in a fight and you're just grabbing hold. He stopped. He thought about what she ought to have. Fair enough, he said. She nodded. The moment passed. Then Abigail screamed from the yard, the kind of scream that means real trouble. Then both of them shot forward like a bolt. Clara had taken a tumble off the porch, and the hollerin' was just Abigail with some scraped knees. In less than 4 minutes, Eleanor was patching up Clara with such a gentle hand the little girl quit her fussin' and started bragging on her bandages. In that moment, Caleb saw Eleanor run to a child's cry like a mother does without a second thought. And he knew, deep in his gut, the real question wasn't if he had feelings for her. It was if he'd find the right words, and if she'd let him speak 'em. Thomas brought the bad news riding back from town hard. That's how Caleb knew trouble was brewing. Frank's called a town meeting, Thomas said, breathless. At the church Saturday night, he's invited the whole county to hear his side on the Hayes land. He's bringing lawyers, son, and Caleb, he's got the bank records. Caleb felt his blood run cold. Margaret's loan, Eleanor's payments, all of it laid out for the whole town to see. Frank Hayes was coming at her from all sides. When Caleb told Eleanor that night, her face went smooth as glass, a deep quiet he had not seen before. It was the look of someone taking a hit they never saw coming. Then, a cold fire replaced it. He has the bank records, she said. That means he knows about the loan. Her voice was flat, working it through. He knows why I gave you money. After a beat, she added, he is going to stand before this county and say I bought my way into your home. He will not say it plain, she continued, her voice like steel. His lawyers will pretty it up, but he will tell everyone I am not the woman they think I am. Folks who know you know better. The folks who know me, she said, are mighty few. I kept to myself for 4 years on purpose, a choice I am now sorely regretting. She stood and started pacing. Eleanor Hayes never could sit still when her mind was churning. With those records, folks will draw their own conclusions about a widow loaning money to a widower. No amount of talk will fix it. Then we do not talk, Caleb said. She stopped and looked at him. "We show up," he said, "Saturday night, the both of us, and we do not explain a thing to Frank Hayes." He met her gaze. "We just tell the plain and simple truth and let the town decide who to believe. That is a hell of a gamble." "Yes," he said, "it is." She stared at him a long while. "You are willing to stand up there with me?" "I am willing to do whatever it takes to see that man lose," Caleb said. "And I will do it by your side. The question is, are you willing to stand with me?" She looked at him with those clear, steady eyes. "I need to send a wire to Carson City tonight," she said slowly. "To your lawyer?" "Yes." A hint of a sharp, determined smile touched her lips. "If Frank wants a public fight, let us make sure we bring the right people." The telegram went out. By Friday morning, her lawyer, Catherine Marsh, a woman with a reputation that traveled ahead of her, sent word she would be on the noon stage. That Friday dragged on longer than a summer drought. The children felt the tension in the air. Clara was clingy, George picked a fight, and Abigail kept asking what was wrong. Ruth, who understood more than she let on, moved through the house with a quiet purpose, trying to hold it all together. At supper, Ruth stood and looked Eleanor square in the eye. "Are we going to be all right?" she asked, a direct 11-year-old with no time for sweet talk. Eleanor set down the platter. "Yes," she said without flinching. "How can you be sure?" "Because your father and I will not let this be the end of our story," Eleanor told her. "And because I have faced down tougher men than Frank Hayes. He does not scare me, Ruth. Losing you all does." Ruth took that in, then sat and picked up her fork. "Okay," she said. After the little ones were tucked in, Caleb found Thomas on the porch. "I am going Saturday," the boy said right off. "I am the man of this house when you are not here." Thomas faced him in the lantern light, looking older than his 14 years. "I want to be there. I want Frank Hayes to see we are not ashamed or afraid." Caleb looked at his son for a long moment. "All right," he said. "You will come." Then he asked, "Is she going to stay? After all this, will she stay?" "I do not know," Caleb said. "I surely hope so." "Have you told her that?" "Not yet." Thomas gave him a look only a son can give a father who is being slow on the uptake. "Pa, she promised George she was not leaving. She signed the loan papers. She has been here every day." He crossed his arms. "What more does she have to do before you tell her you want her to stay?" "Tell her," Thomas said, and the screen door slapped shut behind him. Catherine Marsh arrived Saturday morning, and she was not what Caleb pictured. He expected a stern woman, but she was small and sharp as a tack, with eyes that saw 3 steps ahead of you. She shook Caleb's hand and turned right to Eleanor. "He subpoenaed the loan papers," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "I have already filed to block it, but it is just a stall tactic." "We are not hiding the loan," Eleanor said, her voice firm. Catherine's gaze sharpened. "I will not walk in there looking like we have secrets. We tell our story first on our terms." Catherine glanced at Caleb. "Is that how you see it too?" "It is," Caleb confirmed. The lawyer looked between them, then gave a smile quick as a flash of steel. "All right, then. Let us talk about how we are going to tell it." They sat at that kitchen table for 3 hours with Catherine firing questions from all directions. By noon, she had a plan and 4 pages of notes in a chicken scratch only she could read. "There is something else," Catherine said, gathering her papers. She looked at Eleanor. "I have been doing some digging." "Model the Kellerman sale," Catherine said. "The one Frank claims taints the deed." She paused. "Frank was at that sale. He signed the papers as a witness." The kitchen got real quiet. "He witnessed his own brother buying land he now says Douglas couldn't buy," Eleanor said slowly. "Which means he'd be lying under oath in court." "He knows it," Catherine said. "His lawyers know it. The lawsuit isn't the real weapon. It's the damage to your name. He doesn't need to win in court." Caleb and Eleanor looked at each other. "Then Saturday night is just a public smearing," Eleanor said. "Yes," Catherine replied. "And we're going to walk in there and take his story apart in front of everybody." She closed her notebook. "Get some rest. We need to be sharp." The church hall was packed when they arrived. Caleb expected that. What he didn't expect was the weight of all those eyes turning to him. He walked in with Eleanor and Thomas on either side and Catherine Marsh right behind them. He kept his chin up and met every single gaze. Frank Hayes was already at the front, with a table set up for his lawyers like it was a courtroom. Frank looked up when Caleb walked in, and surprise flashed across his face before he put on a look of confidence. Judge Harland was there too, sitting off to the side, just watching. That told Caleb the judge had made up his mind about something. Of course, Vera Hutchkins was in the third row. Caleb and Eleanor took their seats in the front, right across from Frank's table. Thomas sat beside his father, straight and steady. Catherine Marsh sat next to Eleanor and opened her notebook. Frank's main lawyer, a thin man named Aldrich, stood up. He spoke carefully, making this ugly business sound like a reasonable concern for the town. Then Frank stood up. He wasn't smooth like his lawyer. His anger was right under the surface, and his voice got thick when he got to Eleanor's name. His eyes shot over to her with something that was definitely not righteous concern, and a few folks in the room shifted in their seats. He laid out the loan for everyone, with the figures and the dates. He just let the implication hang in the air. What kind of woman loans a man money? He expected the room to draw its own ugly conclusions. But then Eleanor stood up. She didn't wait her turn. The room went silent. She said Margaret Carter had to borrow against her property for 2 years, all to cover the costs of her little girl's first year of life. She did it to protect her husband the way good women always have. When Mr. Carter found out, he was about to lose his east pasture and maybe the whole farm, so I gave him the loan. He is my neighbor. It was the right thing to do. The repayment is all signed and documented, nothing shady about it. If anyone here wants to see the papers, they are welcome to. Then she looked right at Frank. But I do have a question for Mr. Frank Hayes, since we are all here to get information. Her voice never rose. Would Mr. Hayes care to tell us when he first set foot on that Kellerman land? The same land he claims his brother could not buy? Frank's face went stiff. Because I have a document, Eleanor said, dated August 14th, 1871. It shows he witnessed the sale of that land from the Kellermans to his brother Douglas. She looked at him hard. Which means either you thought the sale was proper then, making your claim today worthless, or you helped commit fraud. The room deserves to know which one it is. A copy of the paper landed on the table in front of Frank's lawyers. Frank's mouth flapped open and shut. Judge Harlan cleared his throat. I believe this meeting has served its purpose. He told the lawyer to have a frank talk with his client about his next move. The room began to stir. It was a different kind of sound now. Folks came expecting a fight, but were leaving with the truth. Frank stood up so fast his chair screeched. He pointed a finger at Eleanor. You think you won something? He said, his voice low and mean. You think this is over? I think, Eleanor said calmly, that you should leave this room, Frank, before I have to call on the sheriff. Frank shot a look at Caleb. It was a threat and a promise all in one. Caleb just stood up. He did not say a word. He just looked at Frank Hayes like he was a problem that had already been solved. And Frank, for the first time, took a step back. He left. His lawyers scurried out after him. The room finally took a breath. Jim Pratt came up from the back. Old Jim patted Caleb's shoulder. Well, now, he said, that was really something. Mrs. Hayes, if you ever need a good word in this county, you come find me, one man said, and a couple others echoed him. Mary Calhoun, a woman who'd always kept her distance, came over and spoke soft-like. What you said about Margaret, about doing things quiet-like to help folks, she said, that was true. She gave Eleanor's hand a pat and walked off. Even Murdoch, who'd been waiting to see which way the wind blew, gave Caleb a nod that said more than words ever could. The lawyer, Catherine, was already packing her things. That lawsuit'll be gone by Monday, she told Eleanor. Frank will go crawl back into whatever hole he came from. You did good tonight. We did good, Eleanor corrected. Catherine glanced at Caleb, then smiled a knowing smile. Yes, she said, y'all did. They rode home in the quiet dark, the three of them. Thomas was asleep in the wagon bed before they'd gone a mile, which only made Caleb smile a little, his mind being elsewhere. He pulled the wagon to a stop at Eleanor's lane. Thomas slept right on through it. Eleanor hopped down and stood by the horse, her hand on the bridle. The night was warm and full of stars, the kind you only see way out of town. Caleb got down and stood near her. "Eleanor," he said. She turned to him. "Caleb, I'm fixin' to say something," he started, "and I need you to hear me out before you tell me I'm getting ahead of myself." She stood real still. "All right." He took a breath. "I know it ain't been long. I know folks will talk, and I'm not asking you for anything tonight." He met her eyes. "But you deserve to know, plain and simple, that what I feel for you isn't just gratitude. It's not convenience, and it's not me just needing someone. It's been more than that for a while. You walked into my house with a pot roast and put my family back together, and somewhere in all that, I stopped just surviving and started looking forward to the morning again. That's because of you, and I needed to say it straight." Eleanor just looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "That was straight," she finally said, her voice a little shaky. "I meant it," he said. She looked down, then back up at him. "I told you once I'd forgotten the difference between being fine and being happy. Well, I've been remembering it lately." She held his gaze. "I figured you should know that." "I'm glad," he said softly. "I'm not making any decisions tonight," she said. "This has been," she sighed, "one heck of an evening." "It has," he agreed. But she reached out and put a hand on his arm, real brief and deliberate, the way she did with the children. A touch that was warm and meant something, but wasn't ready to be more just yet. "Don't stop saying those things, Caleb. Just don't stop." He looked at her hand, then her face. "I won't," he promised. She nodded, got on her horse, and looked down at him. "Tell Clara I'll bring her soap tomorrow." "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Eleanor." He watched her go, just like he did every night. But this time it felt different. It wasn't the ache of her leaving, but the feeling that she was coming back. That she meant to keep coming back. Not for some deal, but because of a promise she made to a 7-year-old boy. And Eleanor Hayes didn't break her promises. He climbed back into the wagon. Thomas was still out cold, looking just like a tired little boy. Caleb drove on home through the dark. The next morning, Eleanor arrived before breakfast, just like always. Clara was at the door before the horse even stopped, yelling her name. Eleanor swung down and scooped the girl up in one smooth motion. Ruth came to the door, her eyes seeing everything, and said, "You came back." "I came back," Eleanor answered. Ruth just nodded and held the door open. George was at the table, and the pure relief on his 7-year-old face when he saw her was so plain, Eleanor had to look away. Abigail was right there beside her, talking a mile a minute about a book she'd read. Thomas was the last one down. He looked at Eleanor, then at his father. He just pulled out his chair and said, "Pass the biscuits." For this family, that was about as good as a blessing. Caleb sat there and just listened to the noise filling his house again. He listened to Eleanor's steady voice weaving through it all. He thought about Margaret, and for the first time, it was just love without the sharp edges. Grief settles, if you give it room. He thought about the kind of love that does the hard things without a word and asks for nothing back. And he realized he'd found that same quiet strength in a woman who brought food to strangers and signed her name to a debt that wasn't hers. She'd made a promise to a child, and she kept it, day after day. The summer wasn't over. There was a harvest to bring in and a debt to pay. Life would keep doing what it does, piling things on you and building you up new. But right then, at that table, there were 5 children with a woman who had chosen them. And there was a man who had started moving forward again in a house that had found its heartbeat. Clara, without asking, climbed right into Eleanor's lap like she belonged there. Eleanor put an arm around her and kept right on talking to Ruth. Caleb watched her, and she caught his eye the way she always did. For a second, something passed between them, something quiet and unhurried that was just theirs. Then Abigail spilled her milk, and the morning rushed on, full of folks who mattered to each other. Some things don't show up with a lot of fuss. They just arrive right in the middle of an ordinary morning, in a house that was finding its way back. It had started as a deal born of desperation between neighbors. It had become something that didn't need a name, it just was. What mattered was that it was real, and it was chosen. And every single day, Eleanor Hayes rode down that lane and came right on through that door. In the end, the greatest battles aren't fought with guns. They're fought with courage, honesty, and the choice to stand beside someone when the world turns against them. This story teaches us that dignity, kindness, and truth can outlast even the harshest storms. Here we bring you stories of the Western frontier, cowboys, love, human connection, and the quiet power of compassion. If this story kept you listening, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, share it, and subscribe to be part of more unforgettable stories. The story you are about to read is entirely fictional. While it may draw inspiration from universal human experiences, it does not depict real people or actual events. Any perceived parallels are coincidental and should not be interpreted as deliberate representations.
In the end, the dust settles the way it always does out on the frontier, quietly, without ceremony, as if the land itself has seen too many stories like this to make a fuss over one more. But if you listen closely, you'll notice that something has changed. Not in the sky, not in the fields, not even in the worn wood of that farmhouse, but in the people who remain. Caleb Rohr is no longer just a man trying to survive the weight of his loss. He is a man who learned that strength is not found in standing alone, but in allowing someone else to stand beside him. And Eleanor Voss, she is no longer the woman who chose distance over disappointment, safety over connection. She is a woman who remembered that a guarded heart may stay unbroken, but it also stays untouched. What they built together was not perfect, not easy, and certainly not untouched by judgment or hardship. But it was real. And in a world like theirs, real is the rarest and most valuable thing a person can find. This story teaches us something simple, and yet something many of us spend a lifetime trying to understand. Love does not arrive when life is convenient. It does not wait until we are ready, or healed, or certain. It comes when it comes, sometimes in the middle of grief, sometimes in the middle of chaos, sometimes when all we have left to offer is what's broken and unfinished. And the question is not whether we deserve it, or whether it fits neatly into the life we imagined. The question is whether we are brave enough to recognize it and humble enough to accept it. Caleb didn't fall in love because he stopped loving his wife. Eleanor didn't open her heart because the past stopped mattering. They chose each other, not in spite of what they had lost, but because of it. Because they understood, in a way only the wounded do, just how precious it is to be seen, to be needed, to be chosen again. There is also something here about family, about what it truly means. Those 5 children did not need perfection. They did not need a flawless home or a life free of struggle. They needed presence. They needed someone who would show up every morning, who would listen, who would care, who would stay. And Eleanor, without ever promising more than she was ready to give, became exactly that. Not because she was asked to, but because she chose to. And in doing so, she reminds us that family is not only defined by blood, but by commitment, by consistency, by the quiet decision to remain when leaving would be easier. And perhaps most importantly, this story speaks to the power of quiet courage, not the kind that draws attention or applause, but the kind that looks like getting up before dawn and trying again. The kind that looks like telling the truth when a lie would be easier. The kind that stands firm in the face of judgment, not because it is fearless, but because it knows what matters more than fear. Eleanor standing in that church hall, Caleb riding through the dark to protect what was right, Thomas stepping forward before he was ready to be a man. These are not grand gestures meant for legend. They are small human acts of courage. And yet, it is exactly those acts that shape lives, that protect what is good, that build something lasting in a world that often tries to tear it down. So, what does this story leave us with? Maybe it leaves us with the understanding that healing is not about forgetting what we've lost, but about allowing something new to grow beside it. Maybe it reminds us that people are not meant to carry everything alone. Or maybe, more simply, it asks us to look at our own lives and consider this. Who is standing at the edge of your fence right now? Who has shown up, quietly, without expectation, offering something small that might mean everything? And are you willing to let them in? Because in the end, life doesn't always give us the grand, perfect moments we imagine. More often, it gives us mornings around a worn table, laughter between hardship, and people who choose to stay. And if we are lucky, truly lucky, we learn to recognize that those ordinary moments are not ordinary at all. They are the beginning of